Hi everyone, it's me. Welcome to today's video. We are wrapping up our month of May reads today. So it was a pretty big reading month. Just gonna start with that. I actually managed to read 15 books this past month, which I think might be my biggest reading month for this entire year so far. And I'm honestly in disbelief because this was also the month that I read Wind and Truth by Brandon Sanderson, which is also the biggest book I have ever read. So the fact that I have read the most books that I have in this year so far in this past month, but also the longest book that I have read so far this year in this past month is like, I don't know how two and two fit together. And I don't know how I accomplished that, to be quite honest, but I guess I was just on a roll. I just really loved reading this past month. That being said, we had some highs, we had some lows, we had some incredible reads, we had some disappointing reads, we had some conflicting reads. So let's talk about all of them. I also started and finished an entire trilogy this month, which is absolutely unheard of. So yeah, just a lot of interesting things happening. In terms of genre breakdown, I read 6 fantasies, 2 lit RPGs, 2 sci-fis, 3 general fictions, and 2 romances. May TBR, also complete, 5 out of 5. Checked them all off the list, which is wonderful. So let's just dive into our very first read of this past month. And that was, of course, oh my goodness, this is so heavy. Do I risk stacking this up here, or is it gonna fall and destroy everything in its path? Because this is the heaviest book. Wind and Truth by Brandon Sanderson. The 5th and final book in the Stormlight Archive Phase 1, so I'm caught up in the Stormlight Archive. It is, however, definitely not the end of the story, and that was kind of my mistake jumping in, because I feel like if you follow Brandon Sanderson and if you know everything that he's said about his books, all the spoiler-free stuff obviously, most Cosmere fans diving into this knew that this was going to just be the midway point of the series, but from the little that I had heard before diving into this, I just knew this was the end of Phase 1 or Era 1 or whatever that means in this Stormlight Archive series, and so I was expecting just like a little bit more of a conclusion when diving into Wind and Truth. And while I would say there were some, like, I can see why this is the end of Phase 1, I can also say this is definitely not the end of the series as we know it. I just thought it'd be more like Mistborn or something, where Era 1 is definitely quite separate from Era 2. Like Era 2 was set thousands of years later or something like that. I don't know the exact amount, but I definitely know there is quite a divide between Mistborn Era 1 and Mistborn Era 2, and I feel like that's not the case for the Stormlight Archive. I feel like the 2 eras are going to be more connected. Anyways, I'm going on a ramble. If you don't know what the Stormlight Archive is, it's a gigantic series set in Brandon Sanderson's huge universe called the Cosmere, and it's just like an epic high fantasy. We follow lots of different perspective points of views that span across this really, really big world, this big realm, and we see how they find their values, how they stick to their morals while in the midst of this big fantasy war. So very just typical high fantasy as we know it and as we love it. But what I loved about this series in particular was the really big focus on mental health throughout the entire thing. We started off the first book learning a lot about the magic system and seeing how it really ties into your morals and values and your mental health and everything. And I was like, this is cool. I love it. But I do feel like the first few books in the series did focus more on like action, plot, while we had this mental health line running more in the background or just more simultaneously along with everything. But I feel like as the series went on and as we got to Wind and Truth, the 5th book, mental health became almost like the most forefront element in the plot. We were really diving into these things with, yeah, mental health, characters with disability, how these characters were just like coping in different ways with their different situations, and also tying their coping mechanisms to magic as well. And I feel like Brandon was really creative in doing this. So I did absolutely love that. And then on top of that, like just reading a gigantic universe like this, reading this book, I saw so many connections within the Cosmere. I think just it's one of those universes, you know, the more books you read in that universe, the more you'll start to see connections and little Easter eggs and things like, ooh, from that series or from that book that also appear or connect to this one. And I found this book to be like the biggest book of connection sections that I have read from Brandon Sanderson. There was just so much happening. There were little references of things, and I was like, like audible gasp. So that was also really fun to read. I will say this book is extremely long. It's 1,300 pages, which is around the same page count as the rest of his Stormlight Archive books, but this one was 50,000 words longer than even like Oathbringer or Rhythm of War. Like, it was by far the longest he's ever written and the longest I've ever read. And I will say this book probably could have been trimmed down in the end. We did get bogged down a lot in number one, kind of like battle strategy, like war strategy, figuring out formations and stuff. And honestly, I didn't even mind those parts so much because I think those parts tied into plot very well and gave you this feeling of like, yeah, war is long. Like, this is a genuine look and feeling of what it is to be like living in the lives of these characters. So I didn't even really mind that we got a lot of detail about that in this book. But what I do think rambled on for a bit too long, honestly, were some of the philosophical rants and debates and discussions and arguments that took place throughout this book. I think those philosophical rants were very interesting, and I love that they were included in this. I wouldn't take them out by any means, but I think some of the ramblings, the pathways that took us to the end, the final outcomes of these philosophical ideas and concepts, I think just took a little bit too long and did repeat themselves every once in a while. But in the end, this series has been a wonderful experience. I just have to sit tight and wait till 2030 for Brandon to release the next installment in the Stormlight Archive. I just feel so deeply connected to these characters. I do want to know like what happens next. I do want to continue the story. I feel like he's also even written a lot of the villain characters in the series to be very interesting villains that have depth, that you get really frustrated with them, but you understand why they turned villain. But yeah, this was an experience. If you haven't watched the reading vlog where I read this book, please do. There's a really fun montage in there where I just lose my mind and I binged the last like few hundred pages of this book in one sitting. This was definitely an epic way to start off the reading month. I'll just say that. Next up, I actually finished another series. So I read Clockwork Princess by Cassandra Clare to finish off the Infernal Devices trilogy. I think most of us know what this is by now. It's another book set in a larger universe by this author called the Shadowhunters universe, and this series is set in Victorian England. So our main character Tessa in the first book travels from America to England to meet with her brother and to live with him, but when she arrives in London, her brother is nowhere to be found. He's not there to pick her up as promised and has sent someone else to do so, so she goes along with them, but then kind of just gets thrown into this world of cults, underground societies, demons, witches, vampires, werewolves, all the things. And the first book in particular had this kind of running mystery of like, where is my brother? What's going on? What is all this weird cult stuff? And we follow Tessa as she goes along with that, as she gets intertwined with the Shadowhunters, as she meets her fellow love interests and gets entangled into this fun and wonderful love triangle. And I will say I thoroughly enjoyed this series. There were moments throughout where I was like, you know what, this is kind of silly and I'm no longer a teenager. This is a little bit silly reading it as an adult. But those moments were few and far between, I would say. For the most part, I had so much fun reading this. It is love triangle done right, where our characters are not just being petty with one another. You know, I did read another trilogy, we'll get to it next, but I did read another YA fantasy romance trilogy where the love triangle was just very schoolyard petty fights, just, you know, like little digs against each other. And I feel like what I loved about this love triangle was that, you know, our parties concerned were very mature about it, were very respectful, and kind of just appreciated each other's boundaries, you know? Like, of course there were hurt feelings along the way. Of course there's gonna be pain and there's gonna be a little bit of like, oh, I'm team this or I'm team this. But I love how the characters dealt with the love triangle situation and how they were just so, yeah, respectful to one another about it. So absolutely love that. I also throughout this entire series really loved how this felt like a series written for book lovers. You know, there were a lot of references to classics. There was a perfect balance between, you know, mystery plot and action, but also with romance and also character development and also like just one of the most wonderful found families. And I honestly really loved how this trilogy ended. That epilogue at the end of this book was really just incredible. And that is saying a lot coming from me as a reader who usually does not love an epilogue. This epilogue was absolutely incredible. I love how Cassandra Clare handled this entire love triangle situation. It was just wonderful. I do wish I read this trilogy as a teenager because I feel like if I read this as a teenager, it would have absolutely changed my life. Like as an adult, I read this trilogy and absolutely had a blast. Had a wonderful time. Loved these books a lot, but if I read them years ago, this story and these characters would have really ingrained into my soul. And unfortunately, I do feel like I'm a little too late to the game. But that being said, the fact that these books do still hold up to this day says a lot. So yeah, loved this. Definitely need to dive into my next Cassandra Clare series. That was Clockwork Princess. All right, so as I mentioned, I did dive into another YA fantasy romance trilogy this month, and I read the entire trilogy this past month. Now, that being said, this wasn't my favorite trilogy of all time. I just kind of read the whole thing this month out of circumstance almost. So if you've been following my reading vlogs, you kind of know what happened with this, but I spun my TBR wheel to kind of just choose my next read randomly, and it chose The Kiss of Deception for me by Mary E. Pearson. I'm gonna need a stand for this because paperbacks don't like to stand up properly. There we go. So I read The Kiss of Deception. The concept of the story is really fun. So our main character is Leah. She's a princess, and at the beginning of the story, she has been arranged into this marriage with a prince from another realm. It's, you know, it's one of those arranged royal family political marriages, and she doesn't want to go through with this, number one, just because she's kind of fed up with, like, you know, she wants to live her life. She wants to choose her own husband, and number two, she's never seen this prince before, so she's convinced that he's just a toad, you know, not handsome at all, not lovable, they're not going to get along. So she, at the beginning of the story, runs away instead of getting married. She settles down into this little fishing village and she thinks she has gotten away with it. But in this little fishing village, she unknowingly runs into, number one, the prince that she was betrothed to, and number two, an assassin that was sent to kill her. And we embark on the story from there. I am so mixed on this trilogy as a whole, but to talk about the first book in general first, I was having fun for the first little bit. I was like, this is just a fun, giggly little YA fantasy romance. Our character Leah is very much a young character. She feels young. She wants to flirt. She wants to giggle. She wants to have her first kiss. Kind of fun, silly things like that. But then once we encountered our boys in the story, I feel like the plot just really took a hold in this first book. We didn't go anywhere. Nothing was happening for like 300 pages in this book. A lot of this book was just, I guess Mary E. Pearson was trying to establish our love triangle and set our connections with one another, but I just didn't see the purpose, the reason why all of our characters were just hanging out in this small fishing village, not going through with their duties, what they had to do, their goals, their tasks, and they were just hanging out to flirt with one another and also hanging out to have these schoolyard squabbles with one another in terms of the love triangle situation. It felt very much like two little kids, little boys, fighting each other, doing petty things to get the girl, and that is just like really not my vibe in this day and age. I wanted to see the assassin assassinating, you know? He was a character that was supposedly, you know, the best assassin ever, and, you know, he was supposed to be really good at his job, but he wasn't doing his one job, and I didn't understand his intentions of why he was doing whatever he was doing. And same with the prince. I was like, don't you have princely duties? Like, don't you need to be somewhere and be a prince? But didn't love those 300 pages of this book. But then by the end of the book, I do think the plot started to go somewhere. Things finally started happening, I guess, once Mary E. Pearson was happy with where she established our romantic connections with one another. And it did set up for an interesting second book. So speaking of the second book, in that same reading vlog, I spun my TBR wheel again and it wanted me to read the second book immediately. So I did pick up The Heart of Betrayal right after reading The Kiss of Deception, and this one definitely was an improvement over the first book. There was definitely more plot in this one. We got a little bit deeper into the political maneuverings of everything that was happening. We learned more about the history of the world. We learned more about Leah and her past and why she has grown up to be the way she is, and explaining certain characteristics that she has. So I liked that. And I also liked in this one how our love triangle finally had some meaning behind it. I think because of the context of our situation and because of the political tensions that were behind all of our characters individually, the little love triangle situation made more sense in this one. And the conflict and just like the rage towards each other definitely made a lot more sense in this one. So I was enjoying this one more than the first. I also just love a court politics story, like doing these little things to out-scheme the other person, even if it's on a small scale. I think that is what a lot of this particular story was, so I was really enjoying that. And so I did have fun with this plot, but I still didn't feel an emotional connection with these characters. And I don't know if it's just because after the first book I was kind of jaded against all the characters because I didn't understand why they wanted to get to know each other in the first place. I do feel like even in the second book, even though I was having more fun with it, I felt just a disconnect with the characters. I didn't really feel connected to Leah. It's one of those love triangles where I was on team no one, which is the worst outcome of a love triangle that you would want. You know, you would want to be at least rooting for one of them, but I was not rooting for either guy during this book because I don't know, while we did get more depth with even our boys in this book, we definitely learned more about their backstories. I still didn't care for them. I think I was definitely still holding a grudge from the first book, just being like, you boys are silly. Can we stop just like squabbling with one another? I thought this one was just okay. It was an easy read. It was entertaining to some extent. So I kind of read this as entertainment, you know, not one of those stories that will deeply impact you, but one of those books that will just, you'll have fun with it. So that was The Heart of Betrayal. And for the third book, The Wheel didn't choose this one for me, but I just thought, you know, I've already read 2 of the books in this series in this month. Why not just finish it off and check this one off the list? So I did end up picking up The Beauty of Darkness. I also wanted to pick this one up because I do think that because I wasn't emotionally connecting with these characters, I had a feeling that these characters would just leave my mind really quickly. And I just wanted to finish the trilogy while I had everyone, all the details and the characters fresh in my mind. And I do think that was the right decision to make for me. Great news is this was the best of the bunch for me. I think just as the series went on, it got better and better and better and better. I do really like Mary E. Pearson's writing. I liked her writing in the Dance of Thieves duology, and I liked her writing in this book. It was more just the plot things and the relationship things that I didn't love, but I do really enjoy the way she strings together a sentence, the way she has built this world, the way she describes things. It is, honestly, it's an interesting fantasy world because there isn't a lot of magic in this world, but it does feel like just a very mythical, fantastical world. And I like how a lot of the magic and how that worked in this world was more just like a gut feeling thing, more of an intuition thing. Not gonna spoil too many details about that, obviously, but I do appreciate how the magic in this wasn't just your typical like elemental magic that you would expect in a YA fantasy, but yeah, it was more just to do with like gut feeling, intuition. There was some prophecy stuff. So I did enjoy that. I thought that was fun. I think in the end, there were some really great moments in this third book, some really satisfying moments. You know, like when you want to see your villains or whatever, you want to see them go down, and you want to see them go down in a very satisfying way. I feel like Mary E. Pearson really made those moments so satisfying in this third book. Like the way we conquered our evil villains was very much just like a yes. Like finally, revenge was definitely served in this third book, and I just felt really satisfied with the way those things happened. So overall, I would say this trilogy was a good time. It's definitely not a YA fantasy that will stand the test of time for me and my heart and my brain. There are definitely other YA fantasy series that I just love a lot more, but I don't regret reading these ones. Let's just say that. I think I did need a little bit of a YA break this past month, and these books did the trick for me. Okay, before we dive into Lit RPG, there is one fantasy e-arc that I read this past month, and it was Mark of the Warrior by Fonda Lee and Shannon Lee. This is the second book in a YA fantasy duology, so completed another series there. Wow, I completed a lot of series this past month with the Stormlight Archive, Infernal Devices, The Remnant Chronicles, and now with this one. Incredible. Pat on my own back. Good job, Jamie. Anyways, Mark of the Warrior. The first book is called Breath of the Dragon. The duology is called the Breathmark duology. I think this duology is so underrated. I'm actually really shocked to see how few people have read the first book in the series. Obviously, the second book's not out yet. This was an e-arc, but less than 4,000 people read Breath of the Dragon, and I'm really confused with that because I know Fonda Lee is quite a popular fantasy author, with the Jade City, the Greenbone Saga being so popular in terms of fantasy series. I'm just very confused as to why people haven't picked up Breath of the Dragon. Maybe because it's YA and her readers prefer adult for the most part. I don't know, but anyways, this duology is co-written, so Fonda Lee plus Shannon Lee, and Shannon Lee is actually Bruce Lee's daughter, which is really fun. So you know just from that this book is very focused on combat, martial arts, and the physical combat scenes in this duology are written so well, like as you would expect, you know, coming from Fonda Lee, who I think is just herself really great at writing physical combat. She has a martial arts background as well, but then also throw in Bruce Lee's daughter into the mix, and you know you're gonna have some really interesting fighting techniques. But anyways, what is this about? We have a fantasy world divided into two. So we have the West and we have the East, and in the middle runs the snake wall. The two sides are very different in terms of what they value, in terms of how they treat their people. So on the East side, martial arts and fighting is very limited, very restricted, very controlled. Basically, there are some people from birth who are marked by the dragon. So if you're marked by the dragon, you will have like these dragon scales on a patch somewhere on your body, and if you're born with these dragon scales at some point in your life, you will probably develop some sort of a magical power. And so because of that, everyone who has been breath marked, that's what it's called, gets scouted, recruited into this military training system to basically become guards of the East side. And the only people who are allowed to learn to fight are these breath marked people. So if you're not breath marked, you can't fight. You're not allowed to train. You're not allowed to learn. And then we have the West side, which in contrast celebrates fighting. Everyone is encouraged to learn how to fight. We have these public tournaments where everyone enters into duels. It's very tied into like honor and everything, and highly celebrated on the West side. So celebrated, in fact, that every 6 years there is a huge tournament that is hosted where people can enter to fight their way for a chance to become the next guardian of the West side, which is this really honored role. So our main character June is born on the East side, the restricted side. He has a twin, but his twin is breath marked and June isn't. So when the time comes, they're really young when this happens, his twin gets recruited into this like military thing and June gets left behind. But not only does he get left behind, he and his father get caught illegally learning and teaching each other how to fight, and so they get exiled to the West side. So we have a family split into two now. We have twins that have been torn apart, and in the first book, June tries to restore honor back into his family by entering this tournament, training how to fight, and trying to become the guardian of the West side, and our story goes from there. So I can't really tell you what the second book is about, obviously, but what I will say is while the first book was really fun and we had a lot of these duels, you know, with the tournament and everything with martial arts, I think a lot of the emotions and the heavy hitting things were saved in the second book, and I loved that about the second book. I think what Fonda Lee has done here with the twins and just seeing these characters that are so tied to each other, you know, their souls are so closely intertwined as twins, as brothers, but they were separated from such a young age, was done so interesting. And also how that ties into the magic in this world. Obviously not going to say too much about that, but there was definitely a really interesting push-pull relationship between these twins. There was a lot of tension. There was obviously competition between the two of them. So I really enjoyed that. I think this book had a really good balance of fun adventuring, but also politics, and also physical combat, and also these personal and character struggles, and also the idea of religion and how these two sides of this wall were so indoctrinated into believing what they believed, with one side being so like, yeah, fighting, let's celebrate it all, and then the other side being like, no, we're not allowed to fight, fighting is bad, but it's good when only the top people do it. And I will say Fonda Lee and also Shannon Lee in this case really surprised me with the plot structure in this. Like in the end, I don't think the overall conclusion of this plot was entirely unpredictable, but I think the way we got there was. And I love how Fonda Lee structures a plot to be just like, you don't know when anything's gonna happen. Things that you expect to happen later on in the book or early on in the book will happen at a time that you don't expect. And I love that. I think it just keeps things exciting. This series doesn't follow your typical YA trajectory that you would expect. And so I really love this one. I think the only thing I was missing was I wanted even more of the twin stuff. I wanted to see more moments between them. And in the end, I think the resolution just happened a little bit too quickly. I wanted to drag that moment on for a little bit longer, which I think is probably a good problem to have. It's better than a plot dragging on for too long. I just wanted more with this one. I wanted to see more moments. I liked the direction we went in, but I wanted to like sit in it a little bit longer. And then diving into my 2 lit RPGs. These are obviously, they were actually both dungeon crawler books. I did actually get through 2 dungeon crawler books this past month too. Look at me go again with the series. I'm just on a roll. Anyways, the first dungeon crawler book I read this month was number 2, so Carl's Doomsday Scenario by Matt Dinniman. This is another series. I think we all kind of know the plot synopsis at this point, but just in one sentence, we essentially follow Carl and his ex-girlfriend's cat, Princess Donut, as they witness the end of their world and get forced into this video game type environment where they have to play this game essentially to survive. And also the whole thing is being televised, Hunger Games style. So they also have to try and impress like sponsors and the company that is behind all of this stuff. So that's Dungeon Crawler Carl in one sentence. This is book 2. I wasn't completely sold on book 1. I thought it was a fun concept. I just think I'm not the target audience for this type of humor, and that is completely okay. It's very crude humor. It's a little slapstick. It's definitely satirical, and I usually do get along with satirical humor quite well, but I think just like the descriptions of things and the humor style was a little bit crude for my personal taste. And I am just still settling into this lit RPG genre. I'm still like unsure if it's for me, because here's the thing, okay? I think a lot of the plot of what is happening, kind of like big picture in the series, is interesting. And I think it is something that I am intrigued into diving deeper into. It definitely feels very Hunger Games-y, where we have these characters that are forced into this like battle royale, fight to the death kind of a thing for entertainment purposes, like how the Hunger Games was streamed for everyone in the Capitol. You know, this game is streamed for everyone on this alien planet. I think there's some interesting things happening there, but I'm just unsure of the way we're traversing through the plot. I think there's a lot of tedious detail in these books. I think the best way I can describe it is it feels like you're watching someone else play a video game, because that is essentially what you are doing. We're seeing a lot of specifics of Carl and Princess Donut and how they're like opening loot boxes, how they are like looting things, and really step by step building these things, like crafting stuff in a game. There's just a lot of detail with that and repetition of like, okay, let's grind and like destroy all of these NPC characters so we can level up and, you know, train our skills and all of that, and figure out which skills, like, do we want more strength? Do we want more constitution? Do we want more dexterity? Just things like that. It feels like you're watching someone play a video game, and as someone who does enjoy playing video games, it's usually not that fun watching someone else because when you're not the one playing, I don't know, like, you don't really care too much about the specifics of everything and like where you're putting all your stat points and stuff. You just want to see your characters go, and you want to see everything happening at a faster rate and just skim over the details. But with lit RPG as a genre, you don't skim over the details. You do get every detail of like every move that our characters make, and I'm just not sure if that's the medium for me. I'm not sure if it's the genre for me, but what I will say is, even though I'm still like, these books are not my favorite, I still want to see where our characters end up. It's kind of addicting in a way. I do like our characters and I am invested in them, especially Princess Donut. So I am invested in seeing where their stories go. So I am going to continue the series, but I'm still not convinced on this genre. I think book 2 was similar to book 1, but we did build upon the world a little bit. We introduced a couple of new features in the game that did add a little bit more intrigue into the story that takes place in the game, and made like boss fights and everything feel a little bit less tedious and a little bit less repetitive, but it still felt repetitive. But I did read book 2, and then I did decide to continue on to book 3, the Dungeon Anarchist's cookbook, but I'm going to continue the series on audio only. So I listened to this one, and I do feel like the series is more palatable through audio, not only because like the voices and everything, the performance definitely gives more of an entertainment value to the story. I honestly just think it's easier as a casual listen, and I am not the type of person to skim a book, but this series is probably the closest I've gotten to skimming because I just feel like with the audio in your ears, it's easier to just let it run. It's easier to just let it play, and in the more tedious, repetitive moments, it's easier to just like let it become background noise in a way. And I know that sounds bad. But it's just true to my experience while reading these books. Sometimes when we get to these repetitive parts, I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna like zone out a little bit, and then like 20 seconds later, I'll snap back. And I do feel like I'm enjoying this series more that way, just more as a casual listen. But what I will say about the third book is I went through some roller coasters of emotions. So in the first bit, I was excited because I think with the nature of this video game kind of a plot, with every time we go into a different level of the game, we basically get a whole new world, which I think is fun, and we get to do new world building. We get to establish a new environment, and it's exciting to see like what world are we going to jump into in the next level. So I had high hopes with this environment at first. I was like, this is going to be really fun. We then though did get into like a little bit of that tedious feeling again throughout the middle portion of this book. But in the last half of this third book, I think we finally started to expand more on the world. We started meeting more characters and started expanding our immediate circle to more than just Carl and Princess Donut. And I think just having more people in the mix, more characters in the mix, introduced more interesting situations for our characters to make like tough decisions, and just added more nuance and layers to our characters in that way, where now there are more people involved. And so our entire like morality system and everything that we're thinking about changes when we have other people thrown into the mix as well. So I liked the expansion of our network in this third book, in the second half of it, and I think we are headed in the right direction with the series. It's just taking a really long time to get there. So those are my thoughts on the third book. The third book is my favorite so far out of the series. I've given all of them a 3.75, but I was reflecting the other day, and I think just thinking back on all of my ratings, I think I would probably rate the first book a 3-star maybe, and then the second book a 3.5, and probably this third book a 3.75. So they are getting better, which is good. I have started listening to the fourth book. I'm not as into the world of the fourth book yet, but we'll see what happens. I have heard the fifth book is the best one in the series so far, so I'm curious to see what happens when we get there and to see if I will be convinced at that point on the series. But I'm just trekking my way through these. I'm not hating them. I'm not absolutely loving them, but I will say they are enjoyable audio listens, and that's why I am continuing the Dungeon Crawler series. All right, little sip of water before we get into sci-fi. I read The Last Contract of Isako by Fonda Lee. This is a space opera standalone, so much fun. We're set on another planet, of course, so we have people that have moved from Earth to this planet, and we're trying to terraform it to make it habitable for everyone to live comfortably. And because of that, everyone who lives on this planet works for this one same company. Different divisions, different departments in this company, but we're all working for the same company. We're all supposed to be working towards the same goal of terraforming. And our character Isako works as a swordswoman. So she's kind of like a bodyguard slash advisor to someone very high up in her company, basically the head of her division. And her division has just been at war with another division that they actually lost. So her division is not doing very well. They're going through a lot of like mass layoffs and all of that at the start of the story. And at the very beginning, Isako's boss actually decides to retire, and that leaves Isako now without a job. So she, for the first time in her life, is jobless. She's aimless. She doesn't know what she's going to do, but she gets offered a contract that she literally can't say no to by her boss's rival, and she sort of takes this as her last contract, her last job that she's going to do before she retires, and this throws her into this world of corporate samurai espionage. I'll just leave it at that. This book was so creative. I loved the planet that we created. I love that we're all working under one company and how Fonda like established this company. It was so eerie the way that this company and the people who lived on this planet viewed their lives and viewed humanity and viewed their purpose. I don't want to give out too much away, but essentially what Fonda Lee said in her talk, because I went to her book tour for this book, she mentioned the significance of what it is like to live on a world with limited resources, where obviously like we're not living on Earth where we can kind of live off the land. You know, we're living on this planet where everything, even the air we breathe, has to be manufactured. So your life is literally draining resources. And if you're not helpful to the company anymore, if you're not helpful to the cause anymore, your life is literally worth nothing. You're literally just like sucking on the resources for no reason. And a lot of the practices that this company has established reflect this. Like, we don't want anyone who's just draining us for no reason and draining our resources, but not contributing to the cause. And in that way, we set this really like wonderfully eerie setting, and I love the little details of how Fonda constructed this. I do also love Isako as a main character. She's middle-aged, which I think is so rare to see in kind of a high-stakes sci-fi or fantasy story. story like this, instead of following a character that is younger, who is just coming into their powers, coming into their prime, we're following Isako, who is literally on the verge of retirement. She's taking this one contract as her last job, so the way she views this contract is very different than like a protagonist who is just embarking on their journey for the first time. Isako has been through it all. Her knees are like crackly and wonky. Her body is giving out. She's not as young and spry as she used to, and she does have a lot of regrets in her life. And throughout the story, she does a lot of reflection on the things she's done in her past, how dedicated to her job she's been, how she has treated her daughter and, you know, her upbringing and handled all of that. And I think it was just definitely an interesting creative perspective to read from. There was some cool exploration into humanity and kind of like what happens when you have the technology to extend your life and the impacts that has on a person, on a person's brain, on a person's mental health and mental well-being. There was just a lot that I loved about this book. There was this wonderful platonic friendship as well, which I think can be rare to see something that's not romantic in a story like this. So I really appreciated that, and we are actually having Fonda Lee on the podcast, which is like absolutely unbelievable. But I will be talking directly with Fonda Lee more about this book, so if you want to hear more about the last contract of Isako or more just about Fonda Lee in general, check out the podcast. I'm actually unsure if that episode will be out before or after this wrap-up video, but either way, check out the podcast. It's on, you know, all the podcast platforms, but also on YouTube, and I'm excited to dive deeper into this book with Fonda. So lots to love about this one. I think the only thing I was missing in this one was a little bit more of a resolution. We did end a little bit open-ended, and I understand why, but I did want just like a little bit more out of the ending. But very strong, wonderful read. The second sci-fi I read was Upgrade by Blake Crouch. High hopes for this one because I love recursion so much, but this one I kept describing as limitless, kind of, because we are set on Earth in this one, so very much more of an Earth-based sci-fi, but technology has advanced to the point where like gene editing, DNA editing is more widespread and more kind of like easily accessible than it is today, but it has become a really big issue because obviously there are a lot of negative repercussions that can come from things like this. There are accidents that can happen if you release like a gene mutation out in the wild that throws everything off balance in nature, or there are also people using this technology for nefarious purposes, like they're introducing viruses, they're doing all this bad stuff, and they're taking over bodies. So in this future version of our Earth, gene editing has been made illegal, and there's a new task force called the Gene Protection Agency where we have like these cops and detectives essentially who are working to stop gene editing from happening and to stop them from going rogue. Our main character Logan works on this task force, and he holds a lot of guilt because his mom was kind of a prominent figure in developing this type of technology, and his family is kind of infamous for it, but he holds a lot of guilt. He works for this task force, and at the beginning of the book, while he's on site for a job, he gets hacked, and we're unsure of what this hack is doing to his body. We're unsure of who the hacker is. We're unsure of all the effects that will happen, but what he does notice is that he starts feeling kind of like smarter. He's able to multitask a lot more. Everything's just a lot more bright and clear, and he can suddenly remember everything that's happened to him. So literally like feels like the limitless pill, but instead of taking a pill and the pill wears off after a while, Logan's DNA, like inside his body, is literally changing, and there's nothing he can do about it, which freaks me out in so many different ways. So I loved the opening, the start of this book. I immediately felt so bad for Logan because the way Blake Crouch wrote about his body being taken over just induced so much anxiety in me in the best way, like in the most exciting way that you would want while reading a book like this. So I really love the start of this. I think we were headed in a really great direction. What I kind of like started falling out of love with as the story went on is Logan started just feeling way too overpowered for the story, and it didn't feel exciting for me anymore because as Logan went on to try and like investigate certain things, everything I feel like was just coming to him way too easily because he was now like super smart, like smarter than the average person. He was able to outwit the people around him very easily. He was able to get information from different sources too easily, and I think it just took out a lot of the struggles and excitement in the story. Like we started off with such a great struggle with his own body being hacked and like just feeling so out of control with that, and I think we just flipped to the complete opposite end for the majority of this book, where he wasn't struggling enough in my opinion. And I think I would have liked to see, I don't know, like maybe more side effects of this upgrade on his system. Like maybe he gets smarter, but then like physically he starts failing. More just side effects like that would have made his character and the plot more interesting. I think the overall direction we went in the story was good though. And I do love how Blake Crouch does this like thriller plus technology combo. I think he's really great at writing this genre. And I will say the climax, like the big third act moment, was not as like insane, crazy, impactful as the one in Recursion was for me, but the epilogue in this one was also great. Another epilogue that I absolutely loved this past month. Everyone is slaying the epilogues. The epilogue in this was wonderful. I think that's what made this book really tied together all the messaging and the themes in the end for me. I think without the epilogue in this, I would have felt very highly dissatisfied with the story overall, but yeah, I think with all of our messaging and everything tied together in the end with that last final chapter, I do think that was done very well. So I think this was still a really worthy read. Not as good as Recursion for me, but I am glad I read it. All right, let's move into some literary and contemporary fiction. So I read Yesteryear by Clare Burke, the book that has been taking the internet by storm. This is one of those thriller lit fic combos where we essentially follow a trad wife influencer who really fakes her appearance on social media. Everything is very highly manufactured. She's promoting this, traditional farmsteading type of life, but what you don't see behind the scenes is her industrial grade stove and fridges and everything in her kitchen. You don't see her nannies that she's hired to take care of the kids. You don't see her producers that are like behind the cameras and planning everything for her. But she is very much just a spokesperson for this trad wife type of lifestyle. She's like, this is the best type of lifestyle. If you're not living this way, you're doing it wrong. But one day she wakes up and finds herself transported to 1855 and her family's there, but everyone's just like a little bit off, a little bit weird. She doesn't know how she's gotten here, and she basically needs to figure out what happened to her while also sort of coming to terms with this lifestyle that she has been preaching about on social media. Now, I thought this book was good. It didn't completely live up to like my god tier expectations that I was thinking this book would be just from seeing everyone talk about it. I truly wanted to see our protagonist, Natalie was her name? Yeah, Natalie. I wanted to see her really come to terms with the reality of the lifestyle she was promoting, and I'm not sure if we necessarily got a lot of that. I think with the whole transported back in time plot line, instead of like showing her the realities of this type of lifestyle, I think a lot of it was made out to be more of like a thriller mystery thing where Natalie was like, how did I get here? I'm being suspicious of everything. This is like all a conspiracy. And she was like looking for clues and things and signs of what happened. And I think we focused a little bit too much on that and focused a little too much on the eerie vibes of everything that we didn't really get enough of a deep dive into like what this traditional lifestyle actually means. I wanted more of a genuine, authentic look on that, and we didn't really get that. And I don't think our character really even learned the lessons that, I wanted her to learn. She is obviously a very unlikable character. I would describe this book as Yellowface meets The Compound, meets also like the unmaking of June Farrow, because we are really deep into like the internal ramblings of this unlikable character, very much like Yellowface. We do have this sort of like eerie kind of like, is this a reality show kind of situation like The Compound? And then we also have this kind of like maybe time travel thing that reminded me a little bit of the unmaking of June Farrow and the eerie vibes that came with that, which I think is a really interesting combination for a book. And I do see the merits of this. I think what was the most interesting in this book is how we dove into more of the influencer stuff and how so much of Natalie's outer appearance was not her at all. Like the things that she was speaking about on social media, she didn't actually believe in herself. It was literally just an alter ego or persona that she created for herself that was just working algorithm wise, but she didn't believe in it at all. She was just kind of forcing herself to do this, and there was some interesting deep dive into what it's like to know people are watching and how you act differently when you know there are going to be people watching your life and like every move and all of that. I think that part of the book was interesting, but I didn't get as much traditional life, traditional wife commentary as I expected from a book with this premise. There was obviously, you know, a bit of religion and themes with that brought up in the story, with how Natalie was brought up and how it affected her in the past. I think also this book did a pretty good job at giving you moments where you did empathize with Natalie as a character, but you still didn't like her. Like, there were moments where you were like, oh, you know what? You didn't deserve to be treated this way, and you did feel bad for her, but it wasn't necessarily there to convince you to like her as a character as a whole. It was just there to give depth to her character. And I think that Clare Burke did really, really well in this, where you could kind of be like, oh, I feel bad for you in this moment, but you're still like, you could have chosen another path from the situation and you just chose all the wrong decisions from the start. So definitely gave me a lot to think about. It wasn't the 5-star read I wanted it to be, but I did still enjoy it and I did find parts of it to be interesting. So that was Yesteryear for me. All right, what do we have next? We have The Encore by Juliette Izon. So this is a contemporary fiction that kind of mixes in a coming of age story with a family story with a little bit of a romance and with a music theme. So we follow a teenager named Lottie. She grew up with an adopted family and she's never known who her birth parents are. When she turns 16, she finally gets some information on who her mother is, and this becomes a pretty big revelation because it turns out that her mother is actually this really famous like indie singer, I think, like indie rock singer. And upon realizing this, it kind of explains Lottie's natural affinity to music that she's always had growing up. And so she starts trying to contact her mother. And as we go on through the story, we kind of like jump into the past, jump back into the present time. We see the story of Lottie's mother and her father kind of getting to know each other and how Lottie came to be. And in our present day timeline, we follow the three of them as they try to like get to know each other. Like, can we kind of be a family unit in some way? They end up going on tour together, so then they're forced into these really tight confines with one another, and this forces out a lot of unresolved feelings, conflicts, all of that. Forced proximity, but with a family. Overall, I think this was a pretty decent read. It was a nice story. There was some depth to it. We're seeing a lot of flawed characters in this book that are dealing with traumas from their past that they've been suppressing for years and years and years. And we definitely have a focus on family and kind of generational trauma and how to break out of those types of family cycles. So overall, I did like that direction. What I will say though is after reading a couple of these kind of like rock star going on tour stories, I just think there's like, the plot doesn't surprise me. Like, if you've read Daisy Jones and the Six, if you've read The Future Saints, I think a lot of these kind of like going on tour stories start feeling really repetitive because there's only so much you can do. You know, there's various plot points where you know your like rock star is gonna go through. And I just don't think any of those moments in this book were unique in that way because like I knew the ups and downs of what was going to happen once our characters went on tour. And that being said, there is definitely kind of an added layer that added onto things with the entire family going on this tour and the family not really knowing each other and trying to get to know each other while on tour. So that kind of added a little bit of a difference to this plot. But overall, it was like I could predict everything that was going to happen in this book because I had read it before, essentially. I do still think it was a worthy read. It's not like I regret reading this at all. I did enjoy a lot of it. There was some nature versus nurture talk, which we didn't dive too deep into that, but there was some kind of like fun mention of that, you know, with the theme of Lottie being adopted and how much she got from her birth parents versus her adoptive parents. The writing in this was actually very digestible. It's one of those writing styles where you feel like you're watching TV. The words really fall off the page, and I did feel like I was watching a TV series while reading this book, so it was definitely entertaining in that way. It almost felt like you're watching a comfort show, you know, like rewatching one of your favorite shows because you kind of know what's coming, you know all the plot points that are going to happen, but you're still in there for the ride. It's casual. There were some moments in this that were honestly a little bit cheesy, but some parts did feel quite heartfelt. And overall, I think this was an enjoyable read. I think it was just a little bit predictable. There was a good balance of fiction versus romance in this one for me, and I have been enjoying romantic stories lately where the romance is very flawed. It's not picture perfect. Both characters make these honestly like horrible decisions and mistakes that you almost like can't come back from. And I kind of liked that, you know? So if you are looking for a story that is, you know, it feels kind of comforting, it feels kind of heartfelt, it's a little bit cheesy at moments, but we have a fun rock star tour kind of a plot trajectory, I think you'd probably enjoy this one. So that was The Encore. And then, oh my goodness, you guys, I read The Burning Side by Sarah Damoff. So another generational story, but no rock stars in this one. Oh, this one hit me so deeply emotionally. So this one follows April and Leo, and they have 2 kids. And at the beginning of the story, they're actually like on the brink of getting a divorce, but their house burns down. And this sort of puts all of their divorce plans on the back burner because obviously now they need to like figure out their life. They go into survival mode. They need to figure out what's going to be best for their kids, what to do with this house, what to do in the future. And so they end up moving their entire family into April's parents' house, and talks of divorce just, you know, like they pause for the time being. They're kind of held in this limbo state. At the same time as they're living with April's parents, her dad gets an Alzheimer's diagnosis. And so this throws a whole lot into the mix as well, just to add on to everything that is happening. And then throughout the story, we just follow our characters through these generations. We have, you know, we have one household now that is housing 3 generations of this family. So obviously things get real, things get deep, emotions come out. We have a lot of these tension feeling moments because of the divorce, the fire, what do we do now, survival mode, Alzheimer's, like, oh my goodness. And this story was just told in such a real, genuine way. And there were so many layers to everything. Like, you could really feel our characters, both Leo and April, and then the generation above. You could really see them fighting within themselves of like, I am struggling internally with so much right now, but I need to keep strong for the kids. It was very much a lot of like, what do we do for the kids? We're literally in survival mode now, and there's so much going on, but we need to do what's best for the kids. And there's also this feeling of guilt that was running throughout this entire book with, number one, things they had done from the past, and also with the fire, and just like, oh, so many like conflicting layers of emotions all fighting with one another in this entire book. There were moments in this book that I resonated with, things like seeing your parents as humans for the first time, and not just as mom or not just as dad, seeing them as real humans with full lives of their own, full struggles of their own, full happy moments of their own. I think many of us, as you know, we become adults, we really start seeing our parents as full human beings, and I felt that within this story. And Sarah Demoff is just, she's so good at giving you the little details that matter. I was saying in my reading vlog when I read this, there were things like little tiny mundane things in life, like a floor tile that you walk across every single day, or that you stand on every single day, that you don't really notice day to day, but then when something happens, like a house fire, that floor tile becomes this really significant symbol, this element in your life that triggers so many emotions and feelings and memories and all of that. Like, how many memories do you have standing on that tile? Just, oh, so much of that in this book. Also, just the idea of you never really know everything that's going on behind someone. Like, you can be so close with someone, a family member, a parent, a sibling, a loved one. You can think that you know them to a T, but at the end of the day, you really don't. You really don't know everything that's going on behind someone's head, what they're thinking, what they're feeling. And that was captured so well in this book too. It's all about imperfect love, romantic love, familial love. We see characters that love each other but hurt each other anyways, whether it's on purpose or by accident. It's just so good, guys. It's just so good, guys. You need to read this book. It really made me just think of like memories, like what holds your memories? Is it a house? Is it the objects in that house? Is it the people around you? Can you make new memories? You know I love a good memory deep dive, and this book gave me all of that. I did sob while reading this book. I just think it was so masterfully done with the parallels of jumping timelines back and forth and making little connections between those timelines. This was incredible. Please read it. The Burning Side by Sarah Demoff. Actually, speaking about books that dive into memory, this was another one. So, The Good Parts by Evan Normandin. Now, this is kind of advertised as a romance, but I honestly would say this is more of a contemporary fiction with a romantic element to it. It's also a memory loss story, which I love. So, we follow Landon and Rose in this one, and they met each other in college, they fell in love, they got married, and I can't tell you too much about their relationship, but we do have a past-present timeline kind of a situation, and at the beginning of the book, we start in present-day time. And in present-day time, Landon and Rose are not together, and as the reader, you don't really know why they're not together at that particular moment in time, but they're not. We see in this opening prologue chapter that Landon has sent a letter to Rose trying to convince her to like come back to him, essentially, that he is worth it, but his letter takes like months to send. It takes way too long, and he actually gets a letter back from Rose saying that it's too late, and Rose has actually taken this memory erasing pill. So even as she wrote this letter back to Landon, she doesn't know who she is. She did take this pill originally to erase some grief she was feeling, to erase those memories, but along with the memory erasing pill, you can't like pick and choose what memories go away, you know? So along with this memory erasing pill to get rid of her grief, she's also forgotten Landon. And so Landon's just kind of like really tossed aside at this point, and it's basically like really over between the two of them, but Landon decides he's gonna win her back. So he travels to go and meet up with her and introduce himself to her and try to win her back, because he's like, if I've convinced you to fall in love with me once, I can do it again. But as we go through the story, obviously there's some like weird morality things. Their dynamic is so different because Landon knows so much about her, everything about her, but she has no idea who he is. He's just a stranger to her. And as we go on through the story and see the things that Landon does to her in the present day timeline, and also see the things they do to each other in the past timeline, there are just so many morally ambiguous things, morally wrong things really, that both of the characters make with each other that really make you think like these two are like maybe not right for each other, but at the same time like you just want to continue on with the story and see where it goes, which I honestly love. I've been really noticing with romances in particular lately that I haven't really been loving a happily ever after, picture perfect type of a romance story. I like seeing these kind of like more realistic, authentic looks at them. And again, I will say this book is more of a fiction story with a romantic element rather than like a full-on contemporary romance. And I honestly love that. There was a lot more deep dive into this book than I expected into the memory erasing stuff. Like, what drives these people to take this pill? It wasn't only Rose in the story that took this pill. We did see other kind of like secondary characters who had also decided to take this pill, because it's kind of a phenomenon in this version of our world where this pill is becoming more easily accessible, widespread, and so we're seeing a lot more people decide to like erase their memories and start fresh because of like various issues that they're dealing with in their lives. And we, throughout the story, really do investigate, you know, into like why these people decided to take this pill. Are they better off after taking this pill? Like, yes, they've dropped all of their sadness, their grief, their worries, their problems, but are they even really them anymore? And are they too like carefree now? Because what we're seeing with these characters that have taken this pill is that they're too carefree. There are really no more stakes in their lives. You know, they're thinking like, oh, even if I mess up this particular life, I can just take the pill again and erase things again and forget everyone again. But then it's like, can you make meaningful connections that way? If you are living your life in this way where like if something bad happens, you just erase. So a lot of interesting things with that in this book. It's messy. I did go through the story questioning our characters and being like, that is so wrong, like literally so wrong. Don't do that. I feel so icky about this. But because I think this story, like I didn't really read it as a romance, I think that's why it worked. I think if you're gonna dive into this book reading it as a romance, you would get really icked out by both of the characters because like they don't do great things at points in the story. So it's not one of those books where you'll be like just fully rooting for the relationship, and that's why I also describe this as more of a fiction over a romance. There's definitely a heavy romantic element in it because we see Landon and Rose's relationship and see how they met each other and fell in love and all of that, and how he's trying to win her back. There's definitely a lot of romance theme in it, but it's not a romantic story as we know it. Anyways, this was so good. I loved it. It's also a debut novel. I can't wait to see what Evan Normandin writes next because this was such a strong first book, such an interesting concept. I love how she fully embraced it and didn't just make the memory erasing pill a trigger for the romantic story. She really made it the primary theme of the story, and I love it so much. So that was the good parts. And then last up, this was actually a romance, Picking Daisies on Sundays by Leanna Sincotti. This is a YA second chance, best friends to lovers romance situation. Fake dating also, throw in all the tropes. So in this book we follow Daisy. She's had a best friend, Levi, her entire life. They were best friends growing up, but she, you know, obviously started developing a crush on him during their like childhood, teenagehood. And there was this very traumatic prom night where she basically declared her love for him, but he didn't reciprocate the feelings. And ever since then, they kind of split ways, have lost touch with one another. They've just been out of each other's lives for the past 4 years. But now, 4 years later, they actually run into each other, and because of certain reasons that I honestly don't really understand. Levi asks Daisy to attend his sister's wedding as his girlfriend. Like basically fake date him because he wants this job, and he has to convince his boss that he's like dedicated and can stay in a dedicated relationship and that he'll like stick around, and that's her story. But yeah, I don't know, the whole reason that we needed this fake dating situation didn't really make sense to me at all, because like why do you need to be dating someone? Like show your boss that you have a girlfriend to prove that you can commit to something long term. Like I don't know. That whole initial situation didn't really make sense to me. So that kind of started this book off like not the best for me and not the strongest for me. But what I can say is I did enjoy the writing style in this book. We really embraced the floral theme, which I think was cute and honestly perfect to read in the spring with, you know, our main character having the name Daisy and then also her working at a flower shop. Like there were definitely a lot of flowers just everywhere, and that translated into the writing style as well. Like things were being described using floral terms, and I thought that was really cute and whimsical. We all sometimes just need a little bit more whimsy in our lives. So I did like that touch with the writing style, and in the end, I thought the story was overall cute. It was tender, it was sweet, it was heartfelt. It wasn't entirely unpredictable. In fact, I would say if you've read a romance book before, you've probably read like almost everything that happens in this book before. There was nothing very new to this book. It was very much just like we're going through the actions of a romance book, and sometimes that can be a bad thing, sometimes that can be a good thing if that's what you're craving. You know, you just want to read something comforting and nice and sweet and you know everything that's gonna happen. So to me, I thought this was okay. I think it was average. I think it was cute. It didn't really bring me anything new other than like the whimsy floral writing style. But I think just because of the initial premise too of like why are we fake dating, it doesn't make sense to me. I didn't really understand it, and for that to be the starting point, like our trigger for the story, it was just hard for me to get into because I didn't understand the initial like why are we doing this. So I honestly don't have very much more to say about this book. The rest of it was just very like standard romance, I would say. So that was Picking Daisies on Sundays, and that was the 15th book. Oh my goodness, I feel like these wrap-ups are just getting longer and longer and longer because I keep reading more and more and more and more every single month. That being said though, now that we've wrapped up, let's get these books onto the shelves. All right, you guys, I'm gonna leave you here for now. I hope you enjoyed this wrap up. If you did, please leave me a like and a comment. If you don't know what to comment down below, let me know what your best and worst books in May were. If you like me, subscribe, do that bell thing, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.